This is the last day of the World Seagrass Conference and the last plenary, and we just had fantastic lunch. So I'm happy to have this time, actually. So having said that, I want to start by thanking the organizing committee and especially CITI for this invitation. I'm so happy to be here and present a part of my work and part of my work that I like and I think it's important for seagrasses. So let's start right away, and since it's a little bit tough after lunch, I will start with the take-home message of this talk. And I want you to remember when we go that including women in the management, governance, and conservation process seem to be positive. And since both men and women are users and very, very strong users of seagrass meadows, then we have to have a gender perspective on these issues. I'm going to talk a little bit of the background of this research, just to place it historically and academically, so you know where these ideas come from and where are we heading. I'm going to talk a little bit of why gender is important, and then I'm going to move more into our empirical research. How did we do this in social-ecological seascapes in Zanzibar, Tanzania? We have this case that we have been working for a while. And then I'm going to say some few words about the future. So if we start with the background then we see that there is a long history of the concept of ecological woods and services. It starts actually in this graph with Harding, the tragedy of the commons, and moves all the way to our days, where it has come up in the policy, governmental, and decision-making agenda. Two things are very important here, is when this daily nature service book came, and then the Costanza paper into nature with the value of the world's ecosystems. And with these two events, the research and the importance of this just exploded. So all of us were working with this, and all of us were trying to find how to address ecosystem services in different systems all around the globe. I started my doctoral studies in 2002, actually, where the special issue of ecosystem services came out. So all these were happening international, and a lot of this in Stanford University. But in Stockholm, at the Department of Systems Ecology, there were these two guys trying to develop theories and conceptual frameworks to deal with these issues. So there was all the conceptualization, what is resilience, what do we mean with social ecological systems, and ecosystem services. And they were producing a whole bunch of literature, not only in scientific articles, but also books, actually. So we have The Rights to Nature, that was written in 1996, and it was the time also when the Bayer Institution for Ecological Economics was forming. Then came the famous Lincoln book, when they really put together the social and the natural. And then the Navigating book, when they address more the resilience. Then comes the Panarchy book, but it's more alliance resilience related, so I won't put it here. So in this environment that all these things were new at that time, then these were producing not only books, but they were producing also scholars. And they were interested in systems in Sweden, but also were interested in the tropics, actually. So they have a bunch of doctoral students dealing with the issues. So you can see here, you see the dot? Yes. The coral people, the mangrove people, and the seagrass people. And these people here were related to the systems ecology department. But then we have Matt, that was in botany department at those days, and he was also interested in management and had projects in the Western Indian Ocean, and they want to work more into the management. And then we have Martin, that most of you know, that was in Gothenburg University, but he made a master with us as well. I want you to notice two things here. Number one, that there are holes here and there, and number two, that there are only 2 women in all this constellation. The holes there and there, here and there, they continue. And I can tell you actually that coral research has gone down, mangrove research is almost gone, and seagrass research keeps on growing and growing and growing. And we have a lot of scholars here, bright young people that are following this further. So I was very, very fortunate to stay in this environment, an enable environment to develop these theories of social ecological systems and to be working with one of the most important persons in the development of this. So, as the young scholar that you are, you made your thesis, right? And I was dealing with social ecological systems in the specific system of Chwaka Bay in Zanzibar, Tanzania. And since then, I was having this element here in women. And at that time, I was interested in the seaweed farming and the impacts. But then eventually, when you are doing ethnographic work and you are working and looking what is happening in the field, you actually see things like this. Women, women, women in the intertidal, seaweed farmings with their harvest, collecting, more collection. It's a very heavy work. Invertebrate collection in the meadows. Very young people working there. These are young invertebrate collectors, also teenagers. These type of things. Women working in the tourist industry, like massage ladies or cleaning ladies. Fishing, of course, in different parts of the Western Indian Ocean. Fishing with their traditional dresses. Making jewelry from shells collected in seagrass meadows. Post-harvesting activities, dealing with fish. And you have very old ladies and very young ladies. So you start wondering, what is this? What does this mean? What these people are doing? And what are the consequences of doing this? And I started trying to find out more information about it. And I can tell you there was barely nothing about these issues. So the next question was, to apply for money, and we were fortunate to get it. And I'm going to present you some of the results. But before, why gender? Well, there are many different types of arguments, and I want to present you some of them. It is good for management, of course. There are many that can argue that. And of course, if you get women into labor, that increases economic efficiency. That is very good as well. And it is the correct thing to do. If you want to have an ethical system, then you have to do the good things. It's morally correct as well. But it's also this historical and justice argument that women have been excluded for many activities in the whole world. So if you want it, you may argue that this is good from a feminist ethic point of view. Then is this about questioning the norm, and who is the norm? Well, normally it's men, and not all men, but some special type of men, that is white, middle-aged, and Western. So much of this research, yes, some of you are pointing to each other. Much of this research, this feminist research, tries to question the norm and to say, well, do we want to have a world that is just basically with the values and attitudes of the norm, or we want another world? So that's the utopist argument. A just and equal world is better to create and to live in. And I guess we as seagrass researchers would agree in this utopia. And what is gender? Well, gender is a social construction. There's nothing given by nature. Gender comes when you grow up in a society that has certain values and certain ways to behave. And when you're a boy or a girl, you learn them. And sex, of course, is the biological part. It's about reproduction. It's about genes. So if you see newborn children, you don't see a lot of difference, actually. They look the same. Sometimes you see them and you don't know if it's a boy or a girl. But as soon as we start talking about gender, then we put attributes to one or the other to make them different or to behave differently. And in our human societies, this starts extremely early. So it's actually very, very difficult to separate what is nature and what is nurture, because as soon as you are born, you get these attributes. So gender actually is key to form us as humans. Gender defines who we are, how do we look at ourselves, that's our identity, what we do, why are we doing that, why are we not doing certain things, and of course this has consequences at all levels of society. So the question is this important for seagrasses? And that has been the question that we have been trying to address. And not only to seagrasses, but natural resource management in general. So the question is, does gender play a role in the way we use seagrasses and their ecosystem goods and services? And does gender play a role in governance and management? Well, I can tell you, I don't know. I think this is an empirical question and that we have to investigate it in different environments and in different contexts. So, how do we make this investigation? This is a simple model of how can we look at these things. We have, I don't like this, sorry. We have the seagrass ecosystems. We have men and women here that use the system. And so they have this interrelation with the system. And they have also interrelation with each other. And this is extremely important for this type of research. And when they are doing the things, it may go, the information, to the management. And I mean management with management agencies and managers, basically, because these state agencies, they are the ones that have the power to change things. NGOs and other actors have also power, but it's the state that has the greatest power. And depending on that, managers and management will respond to this, and eventually it will cascade down to the seagrass ecosystem as well. And in the bigger part, we have governance. That is a more broader category of societal decision-making, power, and use of resources. And what I'm telling you is that these interrelationships between men and women are extremely important, both in the field, if they are working together in the seagrass meadow or not, they are doing different things. But then they go to the household, and everything goes to the household. And in the household, they may have also their dynamics and their different ways to do things and to address things. And to deal with this, both practical and theoretical, is really difficult. How do you separate? Do you treat it as a household unit, or do you treat it as individuals, or do you treat them as families or communities? So the unit of analysis becomes important here. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit how we have addressed this in our research. And of course, this links to the Sustainable Development Goals, this broad agenda that most of the countries are committed to. And goal number 5 is about gender equality. We want to achieve it, and we are committed to that. And for that, we have to change institutions to be able to enable the ones that are not on the wagon to go in the wagon. We have this climate pressure, very high and feeling of everyone. And of course, we have this goal of no poverty as very, very strong. But we, as marine scientists, we have this also. And the goal is life below water. But people working with resources and people working with small-scale fisheries, they say, oh, please pay attention. Let's not forget about life above water also. And my point is, life above water is not only about fishers, it's about also women and their activities. And not only that, it's about elders and children as well. But I'm going to leave it into men and women today, so to make the arguments clear. So, seagrasses are not isolated, as we were talking this morning and in many presentations. In tropical ecosystems, they are normally part of the seascape. So we address the whole seascape and try to look from terrestrial coastal forests all the way down to the deep sea. And when you talk about social ecological systems, of course you have to have multidisciplinary work. You cannot work only with ecology, or you cannot work only with interviews of social sciences. You have to use a variety of methods. There is not a single framework that allows you to make all these things. So we're still fighting and juggling to work with methods that make sense to us. So, as I told you, we were in Zanzibar looking at seascapes. So we choose different villages. We made seascape transects to have this idea of how the seascape looks like. And then we made focus groups interviews and other types of interviews. And we made this very demanding work of having income diaries. Why we did that? Because to get income from interviews is extremely difficult. People may say one thing that is not really accurate to the reality, or you don't remember, or you are... There are many reasons for that. We can talk more about this method if you want later. So we use it because we really want to have a value of incomes. And then these things, we are familiar with that in a way, social ecological system scientists. But then the other part of gender, that becomes more tricky. How do we address that? And why is tricky this? Well, because it's social sciences. And we know that social sciences are complicated. They are contested. You may have very different views of see the things, and you may adhere to one or the other. So you have basically to find your way if you are not training to this. And what I have found very useful for myself and my research group is this book, A Guide to Gender Analysis Frameworks. She goes through the different frameworks and explain the weakness and strengths of the things. Then there are these manuals from development agencies like Oxfam, for example, that they tell you how they work with gender in these development or rural communities that are useful also. Political ecology may help because it deals with power, and many of these issues are actually about power. And the livelihoods approach that has gender all over the way. But to be honest, none of this we felt that was giving us the robustness, accuracy, and the feeling that we could handle with this issue properly. So by reading and reading and reading and reading, then we end up with Harding's typology to understand gender relationships. And Harding is a philosopher of science. And she's important in feminist thought, but as I said, she's more a philosopher. But in her early work, she developed this typology that is about a structure. Who is doing what? So that is kind of, you can handle it in your studies. Then comes more complicated. Why are you doing that? What are the cultural and societal aspects that makes that you do what you're doing? And then, how do you see to yourself? What is your identity? Are you a fisherman? Are you a seaweed farmer? Are you a collector? Are you a businesswoman? How do you see to yourself? And how do you see the others? And what we did really was to link this to the geographical space, to the seascape. And then we had this nice biophysical setting with the transects and aerial photographs and all that. Then we could have the social aspects that were important for us and to really address the whole social ecological system, trying to do that. And we found this, that women, not very surprising, they use only the shallow areas close to their homes, while men, probably not very surprising, they use the whole seascape. So from there is a difference, a gender difference. Then when you put management there, then you see that management, formal, informal, economically, and all the resources, goes into the area where men is working. And this was very, very clear. And of course, it's a problem. Women are totally left from the management process. And we learn things like this. Why does it look like this? Well, there is this idea, at least in this context. Women cannot swim, women cannot drive boats, they are not prepared, etc. And these things that you have in your mind, in a way, they constrain what you do as well. And this, of course, has an impact in your livelihoods, because what you do will be, what you are allowed to do by society and by yourself. I'm not going to go into that. If you are interested, we have a lot of data. I'm going to show you more about seagrasses. Seagrasses show to be very important for subsistence and income for both genders. Particularly this about income is important because, as you can see, they give the highest point. It's just the deep sea for men that is higher. But otherwise, seagrasses really were important. We made a gender analysis for ecosystem services, and at a general level, you can say that seascapes that have mangroves, then mangroves are number one. But seagrasses come number two, very close. And when you don't have mangroves, seagrasses outcompete everything, even corals and deep sea. So they are really important. And when it comes to gender, men were more focused into fish production. They were interested in fish habitat, fish recruitment, etc. While women were more holistic. They could say something like, well, the forest is good for oxygen production, or is important in the water cycle, or this type of narratives. So they were more broad-oriented. When it comes to management, there was, as I said, no formal management, no legislation, no strong management for women. But managers were aware that this was important. However, they have preconceptions that were negative. These are quotes from the interviews, and they say sometimes that women are as housewives who have to obey. That's interesting. Or seaweed farmers are not not prepared to perform other activities, which makes them stay in this poverty trap, actually. And again, these mental models that we have are hindering that we do different things. So these gender disparities are present, at least in this Tanzanian context. And I think it's important that we check if these are present in other systems as well. Invertebrate collection, that is very, very extended activity, it shows that it can be damaged or it can change in relatively short periods of time. For example, from this graph, we can see we made these measurements from 2005 and then 2010, and you see the decline very clearly. And you cannot, with this data, separate if it's the fault of the men or the fault of the women, because they are using the same space. When it comes to fish traders, we found out that women were more dependent on seagrass-associated fish than men. Men like the big catch species with very high economic value like lobster and shark, while women like emperors, goldfish, rabbitfish, parrotfish, etc. So for women, these seagrass species are very, very important. When it comes to this seaweed farming, that there is a big international policy to continue with this activity, is red algae that produces a lot of carrageenans. And we have been doing these studies that show that there are important ecological impacts in the farms, in the seagrasses when you put the farm. What happens is this. If you have a nice meadow, a nice seagrass meadow, continuous with a lot of macrofauna and a lot of fish, what happens when you put the farm is that your meadow will be fragmented. In many cases, it can disappear, and you will have far less macrofauna abundance and diversity, and you still have a lot of fish, but the biodiversity of the fish goes down. Basically, you get only these herbivores that eat the seaweed. And on the top of that, you have these women with having an income below the poverty line and very poor health. This have we checked as well. And there is little management about this. When it comes to men, it's fishing the main activity, and their identity is also as fisher. We have basket trap fisheries that are more sustainable. They provide better income per capita, but they have also very weak management. So it's not only that women are ignored. Some men activities are also ignoring the system. And they seem like old-fashioned, that we don't care about these DEMA basket fisheries. While the net fishery, that is extremely damaging to a seagrass meadow, is having a lot of management. The efforts are good. They want to remove this type of fishing, but the government has not been able to do that so far. Why? Because there are no alternatives, because people have to eat. So they continue using these bad techniques. What happens when you fish with these nets is, again, you have a nice seagrass meadow with high macrofauna and a lot of fish. Then you get fragmentation, resuspension, less clarity of water, and eventually production goes down. And these guys fish in large groups, and because of that, the income per capita goes down very quickly. So they are not efficient at all, and we have corroborated these results several times, so we are very confident in saying that actually. With what we did in gender, we think that you can put these layers of knowledge. If you start with your biophysical environment, that all of us are very good at doing this, then you put the key activities and resource uses, and you do your gender analysis. Actually, you can use it to do a geographical information system that is very useful for managers. And you can really do something about the management and governance, and you will identify all the gaps in knowledge and where you can do interventions that are of value for the system. Okay, so that's what we did. The idea now is to check on this in several other locations. Some words about the future then. I would argue that we need inclusive management. And I will use the inclusive management in the Anthropocene following from the first speaker, Alana. But this concept of Anthropocene is more or less well established now in the academia. But feminist researchers are questioning it very hard as well. They are saying, okay, Anthropocene, that means the whole humanity. Can we say really that the whole humanity has damaged the planet? We really can say that the whole humanity has caused climate change? And the answer is no, maybe we should find some other terminology like Capitalocene or Manthropocene or something like this. So these are debates going on. I just want to raise the question. I don't have any answer really. But the point is that we are impacting this planet unequally, and not all have to pay the same price for these impacts. We really have these key urgent issues to solve. We have environmental degradation, overconsumption, failure in food systems, climate change, and not only that, the economic system is a mess. We have seen financial markets breaking. We have seen that poverty is decreasing, but inequality is increasing. So we have this very complicated situation. And there seems that we are increasing the vulnerability of our planet. And we have this concept of planetary boundaries that there are many critics to it as well. But it shows in a simple way that we are really going from the limits that we can handle. The other instrument can be the footprint and how many planets do we need to continue having the lifestyle that we have now. And we know there are limits to adaptation. The poor, uneducated has more difficulties to adapt than the rich and uneducated. And depending on the country that you are living, you may have or may not have the capacity to adapt. So we have these big problems, and we have to think who is framing these problems and how are we framing the solutions. And if you Google who can solve the problems or who has problem-solving power, then what do you think that you get up? Well, of course, you get Trump and Putin and China's president. And that is part of the problem. The thing is that we have to see that we need a radical change. If we are serious in addressing these problems, and if we are serious in addressing the seagrass global crisis, then we have to be creative and try to find new solutions. And this is not new, I can tell you. People working in these areas have been talking about this for decades. But it's still valid because it hasn't happened. If you increase diversity of opinions, if you include women in the process, it may happen that you will be more creative, and it may happen that you will frame different ways to solve the problems. There are also evidence that when you include women, things may be better off. And I take these publications because these publications are working with hard data and they are working with control groups. So you really can compare what happens if you have women and what happens if you don't have women. And what they find is that participation of women gives better results. that women actually care for the environment, and they seem to be more cooperative as well. So all these are positive attributes for management and problem solving. When it comes to the marine environment, we find similar issues as these ones are for other systems, like forest or water fetching or catastrophic events, this type of issues. But when it comes to marine environment, there is very little research. But some of the research that exists, it points also in that direction. So if we recap and go back to the first slide that I was telling you, is that gender is important for seagrass governance, management, and conservation. And it seems that if you include women to understand the problem and to solve the problem, you may have better results. And what are the bases to saying that? Well, what I'm telling you, there is different types of arguments. There is this empirical evidence from our own research and from other type of systems, and we have this global commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals that we cannot avoid to work in that direction. So with that, I want to say thank you very much for listening after your lunch, and thank you very much to all the people that have made this possible. There are a lot of people. So I want to acknowledge especially to my former doctoral student, Sarah Frokelin, that was the first one that was brave enough to work with gender issues together with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maricela. We'll take questions. Wow, that lunch was heavy. Okay.
Hello. Hi. Thanks for the presentation. Yeah, I have a question. I mean, all the research was on Eastern Africa, if I understand well. I mean, how does that translate to everywhere else?
Yeah, that's why I'm inviting you to do research in other places, because these issues are contextual, and what you may value in one place, what are your important ecological goods and services, may not be the same in another place. So we need really replication of this type of studies. But there are commonalities. Having said that, there are commonalities, and there are many studies and reviews showing that women are normally ignored from many public sphere issues, including management.
Hi, Maricela. Thanks. You've given us a lot to think about. One thing that I wonder about and I fear is that while I certainly think that inclusivity is certainly going to improve and change the benefits and equity for everyone, do you believe that the management structures that we have in many of the societies that many of us work in, not merely in the Western world, but also perhaps even more so in the developing world, the management institutions themselves are designed by a patriarchy, and that by getting women included in this, in an essentially patriarchal institution, is probably not going to give you the same kind of radical change that you would probably expect as a system that was designed by a different set of, you'd call them gender, but I think you could think about it as a much larger set of cultural identities.
So your question basically is that if we don't change the management structures, we will not have the change that we expect to.
I mean, do you think that apart from inclusivity, there are other ways that you can reframe management frameworks itself to not be patriarchal?
It's an excellent question, and it's definitely. I think that you are right. That the management systems that we have are of course, also created to a great extent by men. It's just in the last decades that women are coming more into this, and that it may be a hinder for real change. What is the hope here is that this gender in mainstreaming in all these organizations seems one of the few things with gender that is working well. So there is a global awareness that you have to have women there. Having said that, I see your point that not just because you get women, you change the organization. You really have to change both structure and function, right? And that is the tricky one. That I don't know how can we really make it. If we make revolution or more gradual change. But certainly extremely important point that you made.
Maricela, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And something else I'd like you to share is some tips for us as a seagrass community, how we can better incorporate gender. I believe I've heard it described as a phallic shift in our thinking by a feminist.
Thank you, Alana. Well, I think that it's rather straightforward for us seagrass researchers. Just look what people are doing. Look who is there in the seagrass meadows. Because I'm sure that there are a lot of women in many of these areas, but we normally tend to say the human compartment, or the resource users, or the fishers. But we really have to see that there are differences in activities, in thinking, in what are they allowed or not allowed to do. So I think that we have a very nice position as a point of entry, actually. Do I answer the question?
Hi, thank you very much. Look, this is probably more of a comment, but it was triggered by your excellent talk. So many of us, I think, have been thinking a lot about ways that we can increase the resilience of our seagrass communities. But when you, rather tongue-in-cheek, called it the Manocene, I wondered if we actually need to be thinking about ways to erode the resilience of the Manocene instead.
Again, I didn't catch the last part.
Oh, sorry, to erode the resilience. So thinking about the exact opposite of what we do for seagrass communities and really break down that resilient structure that we have with men in the structural society aspects through management, etc.
I'm not getting the point. Anyone can translate it to me?
I think I've got it.
Thank you, Paul.
I think we've got this conference. We've got this conference where we're talking about trying to manage for the resilience of seagrasses with a lot of the talks, and Kieran is suggesting that we need to do the opposite with the current management systems that we have in place. We need to make them much less resilient so we can break them down and get the new sort of system that Rohan was talking about.
Okay, now I get the point. Thank you. It's a very difficult question. You are talking about deconstruction, and it's related to the question number one. Probably we have to just go back a step and create our systems in a different way. I don't know if it's possible. There's a lot of people working with these transformation issues, but we haven't gone into that so far. Definitely a whole field for the future to explore. It's a very interesting idea. Thank you.
Maybe I could add an insight to, I think, what Kieran was getting at.
some of us work for management agencies, environmental management agencies, where even gender balance is way in the positive for women. In my agency, the entire decision-making hierarchy has recently, it's just changed slightly, but has been women from top to bottom. And I find working in that agency quite a different scenario to working with groups where we don't have that gender balance, but that's mostly about how the conversations go ahead. But Rohan's point about the structures that we work in being generated in a way that doesn't appreciate different ways of working is a very serious one, because in fact the decision-making processes are often still not inclusive, confrontational, and unable to adapt to different worldviews. And because of that, we're locked into a cycle of management which is very difficult to adapt to different scenarios. So some of these problems can't be solved within that structure. And there are many creative ways around the world people are trying to, as you've alluded to, trying to get around that. And in the absence of being able to break down the structures themselves, I think finding creative ways to influence and to enable local communities to adapt in a climate where we need to be able to see communities adapt rapidly is critical. And I think your call for us to look and make observations, but also to help people see things differently is really very important. So thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Any other questions?
Oh, and
Okay, two more.
Thank you very much. This was an excellent talk. But I think if we get back to what I felt was part of your message, which is how do we undo poverty at the very lowest level, which is one of the Millennium Goals that you referred to. We see, for instance, the Women's World Bank, which loans tiny amounts of $50, $100 to 28 million people around the world, finds that women are very good money managers and that they can have these kind of tiny little entrepreneurial situations that you set up there, and they do extremely well. Andrew Orkey, that's Michaela Waltz in the Women's World Bank, and then Andrew Orkey in Partnership for Productivity had mostly women in 38 countries, so there's a comparison between countries getting very small loans, mostly for agricultural and fisheries things. So we all, seagrass scientists, have some participation in helping this poverty of the communities that basically are degrading the seagrass systems, but could be enhancing and bolstering the seagrass systems.
Yeah, thank you, Anita. Definitely, there are many ways to try to solve the problems and try to put the solutions. Without doubt, the people working with development, they are completely aware of these gender issues, and they have driven the agenda, really. But when it comes to us working with natural resource management, it has not followed the same line. So we are lagging behind. But I hope that little by little we are approaching this. And for example, in marine sciences, there are coming more scientific papers dealing with these issues. I get them very often. So I think it's catching up. So it's a good moment to do that. And I'm not saying that all seagrass researchers have to be gender researchers. It's really difficult for us natural scientists to deal with these things. But I think that we can create alliances that we can identify the problems, and then you work together with a social scientist, a political science, an anthropologist, a sociologist, and try to bridge and make a deeper understanding of the situation. This hit and shot research is not very good, really. These rapid appraisals, they will not solve our problems. I am rather convinced about it.
Building on this thread of patriarchal institutions and kind of deconstructing those, I'm reminded of what you said at the beginning in relation to gender being a construct, a social construct. But in saying, and the same has been said about things like race, for instance. But in saying that, do we risk losing this sense of identity? What are the implications? And making that statement, is that suggestive of some sort of higher privilege, white privilege, the privilege of wealth? Being part of the Western culture and having created these institutions, are we being privileged by challenging this idea that they're social constructs to begin with?
Your question is if we are privileged?
It's that, but also, challenging this idea that these are constructs to begin with, and that we risk losing the identity associated with these constructs, being a man or being a woman.
I think that you touch about one of the most important discussions in this area. Actually, there is this very big discussion. How do we deal with this in order to be accurate and to create positive change? There is people that say, no, let's go by diversity. Let's deconstruct to the minimum level. And then other group of people say, no, we need to keep this group identity, because otherwise we are lost, as you seem to imply. And again, what is the right answer? I don't know. But having been dealing with this issue for about 10 years now, since we get our first grant, I'm inclined to say that it's fruitful to keep the categories of women and men, because, as you said, and as society really forms you. And then you have a lot of other issues. I mean, you can have homosexuality, bisexuality, or how do you look at yourself, or very complicated issues. And eventually, as research advances, you may go into that. I was talking with a researcher working in gender at the Resilience Center, and she was telling to me, why are we assuming in our studies that the head of the household is always a man? In many cases it's a woman, and in other cases may not be a man or a woman, but I don't know, a gay in the community, or the grandma. So the level of complexity is very high. And my group and I think that what we have been doing is to try to take this big mess and trying to put it in a level that is fruitful for management and governance. I think that's what we are aiming to.
Thank you, Maricela. And I think that's been a very thought-provoking, talk. Thank you very much. And I think that's why we're all here, right, to discuss these things. The conversation doesn't have to end here, so I encourage all of you to, get each other's contacts and, continue this conversation until the next ISBW and beyond. Thank you very much, Maricela. Would you all like to join me in thanking Maricela for that talk? Thank you.